In a recent Steam update, Sony dropped an art book for fans to obsess over, and I've decided to do just that. Is this largely because the art book confirmed a theory of mine? Yes, absolutely, that's why. But there's so much good stuff in here that we've got to examine it all, and I'll get to the theory when the book does. The book starts with a giant mind-blower by revealing that there was originally a whole conversation and a couple of choices during the bus trip that was entirely cut from the game, if it was even shot. The scene starts with Sam hearing her phone ringing in her backpack, which, because this was written by British people, they call a rucksack. Then we get a conversation that can serve to completely recontextualize the start of the main game. Chris was trying to get in touch with Sam, but either she didn't have a signal going through the mountains or, just as likely, she was dodging his call. More importantly, her mom is encouraging her to date Chris, who the mom has always liked. What? Now, look at the two options she can respond with, saying it won't happen, or by telling her mother to stay out of her business, which, crucially, is not her shutting down the idea of getting with Chris. Then, in the most frustrating move they could have pulled, the signal goes off before we can find out what Chris's message was. This would have had a massive effect on how we interpret their first meeting, especially since this is the first time we've had Chris mentioned, since he was absent from the prologue due to drunkenness. Also, and this isn't related to the art book, but revisiting the remake had me thinking, was it the team at Ballistic Moon calling an audible to add the bit in the Until Dawn remake where Beth had a thing for Chris? Or was that also cut content from the original version of the game? It's so torturous to get a glimpse of this dialogue scene and know that there are at least two parts of it we're not seeing. What happens if she's a dick to her mom right off, and what happens if she tells her mom to stay out of it? I know I say this a lot, but man, if you got a copy of the full game script lying around somewhere, just send it my way. It's not hard to make an anonymous email account, and inquiring minds want to know. Does this mean that there was a cut bit of conversation at the bottom of the ski lift where we find out what the message was? Or was the message just that the gate was closed and he left a note since he couldn't guarantee that Sam's mom would get the message through? The next section is the script pages for Mike finding a way into the sanatorium. And while there's nothing new here, I'm fascinated by these two pages nonetheless, because the script is super weird in two ways, one of which I understand completely, and the other has me absolutely baffled. So, let's start with the thing I can easily explain. The continued that appears after every time the name Michael comes up. Now, this is a quirk of the screenwriting program Final Draft that they used to write the script. I mean, we can assume that Final Draft is what they were using because Will Biles mentioned it in that GQ piece where the interviewer didn't know what he was talking about. The point is, this is an automatic bit of annotating that the program does when it thinks that a block of dialogue is being broken up by a line of description. I'll show you how it works. As you can see here, two lines of dialogue are spoken by the same character without interruption, and the continued suggests that they should be delivered in close proximity since it's part of an overall block of dialogue. Now that's not what's happening with Mike, though. Most of his lines are being delivered at different times, frequently in different locations. So why is the continued still there? Because the program doesn't understand the script. All it knows is that the same character spoke multiple times without another character having a line, so it assumes that this is all part of the same block of dialogue. The result is confusing clutter on the page. Luckily, this is an easy thing to avoid, since you can just drop into the preferences here at the top of the program and turn off mores and continueds, which is literally the first thing I do whenever I start a script. I personally think it should be set to off by default, but Final Draft is kind of a mess as programs go. Literally every time I turn it on, it auto-loads the last 10 scripts I've opened for no discernible reason. If they hadn't forced an update to the file format it exports, changing from FDR to FDX, I'd still be using Final Draft 6, but luckily I had to get my Final Draft 11 because a job required it, so it was deductible for my taxes as a work expense. None of that was important, but I work with Final Draft every day and I never get a chance to talk about it. Okay, let's move on to the absolutely baffling part. Why is there a line of italicized text before each line of dialogue, which summarizes what's about to be written in the script? Creepy old buildings, awesome, is followed by, why the fuck wouldn't I end up in the creepiest place on planet Earth? Strange, right? I think what's happening here is that the first person to work on the script did so in a hurry, describing the action that's going to be taking place and then putting in an italicized line, laying out the kind of thing they think Mike should say here. Then the final draft file was handed off to someone else to actually write those lines. They did that, but then they didn't delete the shorthand notes, so that writer 1 could see that the instructions were being followed and what they did with the prompt. The puzzling part is that the instructions never got removed from the script, or if they did, this art book section is being made using a fairly early production draft of the PS4 version, which is also possible. Either way, it's super weird that those lines ended up in the art book. Now we've got the tower collapse, which, while it doesn't confirm a theory or anything, at least clears up a mystery. Specifically, why does the tower get engulfed in flame so quickly during the collapse? In the finished game, when the tower starts to shake, a spark flies off of the circuit breaker, and it turns out the entire tower was made out of match heads, based on how quickly it goes up. So it seems that there was originally an explanation for this. During the exploration of the tower, the characters seemingly would have found a gas stove hooked up to a propane tank, and that tank's tube would have come loose, so when the spark went off, it ignited the tank, causing an explosion. Did they cut this because the explosion would have been too hard to do? Or because it beggared belief that Matt and Emily would have survived being within a few feet of a gas tank explosion? We can't say, but at least we know why the fire became such a huge threat so quickly. Also, hopefully you can see here why turn-off continues in final draft. I don't know what Emily's last line was, but between it and the screen, the whole place shook, a gas line came loose, and there was a large explosion. I don't think anyone would make the argument that this scream was a continuation of the previous line of dialogue. There's also an additional choice here, with Emily either trying to grab the radio or shift herself to safety. As we can see, this was a meaningless choice, with both options ending with Emily clinging to the railing as the tower collapses, so it's not a huge surprise that they chopped it out. Now for the real mind blower of these script pages, as we move into the prank chapter. We already knew that the plan for the prank was majorly changed, because video has shown up revealing that Chris was originally in on it. This makes sense from a story standpoint, because Josh building his entire revenge plan around making Chris suffer makes perfect sense if his supposed best friend joined in on a plan to humiliate Hannah that got both of his sisters killed. But since Chris wasn't involved in the prank in the final version, it led to the creation of a ship between these two, and honestly, it's a much more interesting version of the story. I made a whole video about it, which I'm going to link below as usual. There was another big problem I had with the logic of the prank though, and that's just what a bad friend Sam is, since she knew about the prank and disapproved of it, but let it happen anyway. All she had to do to stop the prank if she didn't like it was to hang out by the door and wait for Hannah to show up, but instead she goes looking for Hannah, which is the dumbest thing you can do in that situation. Well, finally we have an explanation for why Sam does something so stupid. It's because the whole going looking for Hannah sequence was cobbled together after all of the filming was completed. In the original script, and we have to assume this was all filmed, Sam was a 100% active participant in the prank. The line about it not being Hannah's fault that she had a crush on Mike originally happened in the bedroom while they were setting things up. Also, the line about Mike not being anyone's man originally had a great follow-up from Emily, but they had to cut it because it involved dialogue from Chris and he was no longer a part of the prank either. The key part though is that originally Sam was part of the prank until she felt guilty and stopped it, and it's only her standing up to call it off that revealed to Hannah what was going on. This is a moment so pivotal that they put it in the art book twice, or possibly the copy editors were tired that day. Then we get a moment that I'm absolutely shattered they left out of the game. Mike tries to apologize, but he gets distracted by how hot Hannah is with her shirt off. God bless you, Michael. So, why the big change? Obviously, the idea is for Sam to be the final girl archetype, and in all likelihood, when they started cutting the footage together, they realized that people weren't finding Sam particularly sympathetic in that role, since she'd been a willing participant in the prank. So they tried to lessen her involvement during the edit so that her character would be more likable. And while that didn't work on me, I'm still not a Sam fan, I'm sure it had its intended effect for parts of the audience. That still doesn't explain the Chris change though. As we can see in the dialogue here, he's completely involved in the prank and has none of Sam's qualms. So his move to no involvement whatsoever is a much bigger change than Sam going from extremely reticent and blows the whistle to knows about it but lets it happen anyway. Is my video correct? Is Josh's buried crush the reason they changed it? Or was it something as simple as looking at the footage and realizing, hey, where was Josh while all of this was going on? And then deciding to create that he and Chris could be relied upon to get blackout drunk at parties, so they just put both of them in the kitchen, not realizing how that one simple change was going to completely upend the entire Psycho Killer storyline. Now that's a butterfly effect. Speaking of the Psycho, the next section of the art book is about the chase and concerns itself entirely with what happens if Sam hides under the bed instead of jumping over it. Now, it's possible you don't know what happens, since it's such an incredibly bad idea that I'm guessing something like only 1 in 1,000 people would try it during their playthrough of the game. So let's check it out. As you can see, the script has perfectly mapped out how this scene unfolds, laying out all of the options for the choices the player can make, so that they can easily plan out filming and animating that scene. Although, there are a couple of beats that were added to the game. Here we see her hide under the bed, and it talks about whether she was quick enough, but it's not clear what that means. In the game, you have a choice to try and flee or keep still and hope he misses you, which is maybe what they were intending here, but it wasn't written clearly if that was the case. More important, though, is the great beat that they added just as she gets under the bed, having to do a quick QTE to remember to turn off the flashlight. I wonder when they realized they needed something like that. Only when they saw that the flashlight was still in her hands as she was getting under the bed and sending light everywhere? Also worth noting here that someone has finally switched off the automatic continueds in Final Draft. Here we've got 3 Sams in a row, but not a single continued to be seen. Now we arrive at the final screenplay section and the confirmation that I teased earlier. So, there's something that's been bothering me about Josh's Psycho reveal speech since I first played the game a decade ago. It's right here.
How does it feel? Do you enjoy feeling terrorized, humiliated, panicked? All those emotions that my sisters got to feel 1 year ago? Only guess what? They didn't get to laugh it off. No, they're gone.
What does once 1 year ago mean? It's gibberish, and kind of stands out as such. My assumption at the time was that Rami Malek had flubbed a line, and everyone was so happy with the rest of his performance that they just went with the take where he screwed up and figured they could loop in the correct word later on. Now this isn't that far-fetched, as we've seen it happen again in The Devil in Me, where they wrote the wrong name in a voiceover script, made a note to fix it later, and then never got around to doing it. Or maybe they just didn't notice? In any event, as we can see both here in the script and on the next page in the giant quote, Josh was supposed to say all of the emotions my sisters felt just 1 year ago. So there you go, theory confirmed, he flubbed the line. As for the rest of the script, it's extremely close to the speech that Josh gives in the game. The only major difference is that in the script, when we see him in the basement, he was testing out the ghost projection camera equipment, which was of course set up with the projector and the bulb catalog you can find in the game. Tragically, that hint no longer pays off in the game. Instead, we've got Josh preparing to record the footage that he would later use to make the ghost projections, although he should really be doing this in front of a green screen. It's too bad we never actually find the ghost dummy in the game. Seems like an oversight since he'd already made the model, right? Now, a couple of additional thoughts. Note that the continues haven't made a comeback, given more evidence to my theory that this was written in order, and at some point midway through the script, the main writer figured out how to turn those off. Here's another fun fact about screenwriting software Final Draft. You might have noticed in the script pages that everyone is referred to by their full names. Christopher, Samantha, Joshua, Michael. But when they appear in the action and description, it's all Josh, Sam, and Mike. This is likely due to another quirk of the program. One of the time-saving features of Final Draft is that you don't have to write out names in dialogue every time. Hit the first letter of the name and it will auto-complete, unless there are multiple characters whose names start with the same first letter, in which case a menu comes up and you can choose, or just hit another letter to narrow it down to who you want. So what likely happened is that when the writers started the script, they were writing out full names. And the first time you put a new name into the character field, it saves that name to the character list and autocomplete. Then, and I've done this myself, you start writing shorter versions of people's names because it's easier. But you don't bother changing the name in the character field because it's already there and it takes no effort to keep using that autocomplete. Now, the names really should be harmonized to avoid confusion. It's rare for a movie to have a character named Sam and a different character named Samantha, but it does happen. It's easy enough to fix this. You can do a global replace that only affects the character fields. But, fun fact, that doesn't change the list of characters the game keeps. So if you global replace all of the Joshuas to Joshes, The next time you go to a character field and hit J, it's still going to autocomplete to Joshua. To change that, you have to go into the character list and recompile the list of names. I know it's weird that I'm spending so much time talking about Final Draft, but in my defense, the two things I'm an expert in are screenwriting and supermassive games trivia, so this is like the topic I'm most suited to be talking about. Finally, take a look at Josh's collar here. The good people at Ballistic Moon neglected to put a buttonhole to match this collar button. This is a detail I'm weirdly fixated on in games ever since that one about hunting demons. I feel like it was called Demon Hunt? It's possible that this incredibly faint line on the texture is supposed to be a buttonhole, but it doesn't look like the buttonhole we can see directly beneath it. Also, it's possible that there's supposed to be a buttonhole at the collar of his denim shirt, but we can't say for sure because we can't see the button there in the picture. Something for me to check out later in free cam, I guess. This isn't an overall problem with the game, mind you. Just the Psycho model. As you can see here, Mike's layered outfit from the start has plenty of super well-defined buttonholes. A thing that definitely matters. Now we move on to the concept art section, where we can see that they knew exactly the game they wanted to make. Check out how close the bottom of the cable car station is to the finished product. The fire lookout tower is just as foreboding as it is in the game, but it had staircases instead of ladders, so it was less of a health and safety nightmare. The Sanatorium is just an exact recreation to the point where it's a little creepy. Seriously, are we sure they didn't just do the concept art sketches afterwards and they're not playing a trick on us? Then we get storyboards. Once again, we can see that Supermassive Games is incredibly careful about getting exactly the shots they want. This is all planned out to the minutest detail. Look at how close all of these are. I'm sure there are other storyboards where they took some liberties during the shoot or changed camera angles during production. But still, it's amazing to see how clear their vision of the game was, long before it was ever complete. There is one question I have, though. What was the timeout in the bear trap finger sequence supposed to be? I was pretty sure that there wasn't a timeout in that sequence, but just in case, I loaded it up, and as you can see, Mike will just stand there forever until a decision is made. Here in the storyboards, you can see what happens with the prying. He just breaks the machetes and then he has to cut his fingers anyway. Or he just goes straight to cutting them off. Unfortunately, they don't include the script page for Option C, so sadly will have to remain a mystery. Did Option C and the timeout have something to do with the fact that Wolfie or Blackie is stalking him during this sequence? Another thing a full script would have been able to reveal to us. Finally, we get shown a render of how they developed the game's cover art. Now, if only someone would take this rendering file off their computer and use it as the basis for a 3D printing file, we could all get our own Until Dawn hourglasses, and the dream would be a reality. Okay, this book was amazing. Less than 50 pages and still packed with a wealth of new information and shocking surprises. Hugely satisfying, yes, but in the end, it just makes me more determined to get my hands on a copy of that script. What else changed? What nuances are we missing? Hopefully we're going to find out sooner rather than later.